criticized by someone you respect, and this is where I use the principalship. If a parent would call me and criticize something I was doing as principal, the first thing I looked at is, do I respect the parent? If I had no respect for the parent, I didn't even pay attention to him, just ignored him. If I respected the parent, then I looked at their complaint. I took a look at myself and asked, why is this person complaining? Then you got to decide if that person has some warrant to what they say, or they don't have some warrant to what they say. If they don't have any warrant to what they say in your mind after studying it, then you just have to agree to disagree. But if you look at that, and that person that you respect actually has a point in their criticism, what must you do? Change. Okay? And I think that's a good thing, and I think that's what Martin Luther King meant here. Why do I have enemies? If I have enemies I respect, I better pay attention to why they don't like me, and maybe I got to make a change. But if I have enemies I don't respect, just God bless, I love you anyway, but I'm not paying any attention to you. That was kind of his idea. Does that make sense? Okay? Second part of his three-step process on how you should love your enemies is always find an element of good in your enemy. As hard as it might be, find an element of good in your enemy. Now, he's a pastor, and if you are religious, if you are someone that believes your faith, you've got to think that all people are made in the image of God. So all people have to have some good in them. Okay? That was his idea. All of us are made in the image of God. Therefore, I can find something good in Taylor, even if I think she's a big-time enemy of mine. There's something good about Taylor. And you've got to concentrate on the good. That was his second step to love your enemies, was to find good in your enemies. And then the third one, which is the hardest one, when an opportunity arises to defeat your enemy, stick it to your enemy, refrain from doing so. When an opportunity comes for revenge, or to stick it to your enemy, or to make your enemy look foolish, or to hurt your enemy, even though you want to do it bad, don't do it. Refrain from doing it. Instead of payback, choose, from a Christian point, forgiveness. Okay? So Dr. King stressed in his sermon that there will always be opportunities to pay back your enemies. You'll always have a shot to give them a shot. So instead of giving them that shot, don't choose payback, choose forgiveness. Now, during the sermon, he went on to explain why Christians should love their enemies, just in general, in Christians. And he gave 3 reasons why Christians should love their enemies. Okay? He's talking about violence, he's talking about hate, and he's talking about love in this particular part of his sermon. So he gives 3 reasons why Christians should love their enemies. Now, as far as violence goes, this is kind of interesting. I thought this was interesting when I heard it. He said, as far as violence goes, someone has to dim the lights on violence. Somebody's got to take the stand to dim the lights on violence. Now, what would be an example of that? I thought this was interesting. 2 cars are coming at each other. Both have their bright lights on. Okay? Somebody's going to have to dim their lights, or what are you going to have? Possibly an accident, because you got 2 people coming, both stubborn, won't dim their lights. I'm not dimming my lights till he dims his lights. I'm not dimming my lights till she dims her lights. See that all the time. His point was, someone has got to dim their lights. 2 cars coming at each other, both with their bright lights on, neither driver can see, could cause a major collision. Someone has to reach down and dim the lights to avoid the collision. Okay? That's what he thought about violence. As far as hate, he said, hate distorts the personality of the hater. Hate distorts the personality of the hater. What does that mean? I haven't seen Emily Keller hating too much. I'm not with her all the time, but she seems like the person that could maybe get upset with an enemy or someone who would annoy her. But Emily seems to be a very nice, caring person. I picked the wrong example. So everybody's going, hey, that's BS. Pick somebody. Okay, I'll pick Ashton.
There you go.
No, my point is, when you become a hater, it distorts your personality. You're not really who you are. Okay? My wife tells me it all the time. My wife told me last night, I was a hater last night. Oh, man, was I a hater. You know what I hated? I hated Aaron Rodgers. And I hated the Rodgers that was the tight end for the Packers. And I mean, I really hated James Jones last night. And who I hated worse than that was the coach of the Packers, who ran for a touchdown last night instead of letting Rodgers throw. Why'd I hate him? Because I was only down 8 points in fantasy football. I had 3 players going. If you can't get 11 points or 8 points with 3 players in fantasy football, when you got Aaron Rodgers, who would get 8 points himself in the sleep, he didn't get jack last night. Anybody watch the game? He was awful. And my wife said to me, in essence, you're a hater. And you're not playing fantasy football anymore because your personality changes. You don't even watch the games with the same attitude as you did before fantasy football. You're done with fantasy football. Not quite that enthusiastic, but that's what she said in a nutshell. As I was screaming at Aaron Rodgers, she's going, do you think he can hear you? But the point is, my whole personality changed because I was in a hating mood. Was I in a hating mood last night? Yeah, I was mad. Over what? She always says, my wife drives me nuts. She 34 years married. You know what she always says when I get wound up? I bet there's a lot of people that'd like to have your problems. My wife is silent but deadly. Can you imagine being married to me as hyped up as I am? She's as quiet as can be. A lot of people like to have your problems. Anyway, point being that hate distorts the personality of the hater.
You're hating on your wife right now.
Well, I am. It's not my personality. I'm not hating on her. I'm hating on her in a loving way. But anyway, I hope you watch this tonight, Carol. But anyway, Dr. King stressed that if you hate, the hate distorts who you are and changes your personality. Probably correct. He said love has a transformative power. And that love transforms you into what? A better person. Have a little love on Aaron Rodgers. I'm thinking, how could Glenn Anderson even like this team? I bet were you just as wound up as I was? Not really. You figure they got to lose. Yeah, that's right. Positive man. So, that was King's message. Does that kind of give you a little bit of idea where he's going for? He's always going to take a nonviolent approach to protest. And that's going to end up being an issue for him later in the Civil Rights Movement. Well, let's kind of go back to President Kennedy. When he took office, he strongly believed that the federal government should pass laws to guarantee equal rights for Negroes. We weren't worried about Hispanics and Puerto Ricans and all these people at the time, to be honest with you, because there was such a strong resistance to blacks. So when President Kennedy took office, he strongly believed the federal government should pass laws to guarantee equal rights for Negroes. And obviously at this time in American history, was that the consensus of most white Americans? No. I'm going to show you some things in jest when we get through some of this. The old All in the Family Archie Bunker. I'm going to show you things that were on the TV in the 1970s. You wouldn't believe they will say.
Oh, yeah, you showed us that.
Yeah, and some of those are incredible. But it just wasn't the consensus of Americans, especially white Americans, that the Negro be given his or her equal rights. Now you remember civil rights was a major issue during the campaign of 1960. And remember we read that excerpt from If Kennedy Lived, that if Dr. Martin Luther King's father would have edged on Nixon instead of Kennedy, who knows where we'd be, who knows how the Cuban Missile Crisis would have came out, and history could have changed. Okay? Now, as we think more about this, I just kind of want to make some points. We're gonna move on to the Kennedy administration and civil rights tomorrow, but I had a kid walk down the hall the other day that said, yeah, so-and-so said I was a racist because I called Obama black. This is what this kid said as he walked down the hall. I'm thinking to myself, does he have the right perspective or not on this? Is he being racist by calling President Obama black? How many people think that you're being racist when you say that? Okay, that's good. How many people think there might be a more appropriate way to refer to his race than black? What would be a more appropriate one? African American. Now, I want to make a couple points out. This is important. This is important. When I make the term Negro, as we talked through the 60s, that was a very acceptable term to to refer to African Americans. There wasn't the term African Americans in 1960. They were called Negroes, and they did not mind being called Negroes. The other N word, as you can imagine what I'm talking about, was very unacceptable and offensive. Actually more offensive probably then than it maybe is now. Okay, I read stuff all the time about kids that call each other that, which I just have a hard time understanding. Even white people call themselves that. But it's a point. So, listen up, in finishing this up, you have to realize that during our course of time in talking about civil rights, that Negro was an accepted term. Calling an African American black is not racist in my opinion, but there are better political terms than black. Yes?
So are there better political terms for white people?
You know, we could get into that conference too. Caucasian, it is kind of interesting. You know, if you grew up in a family like I did, my dad said this, and I'm not proud of this, but this is just the way he was. And I'm just telling you a quote, so don't take offense to it. My dad he was very racist. My mom was very racist. If you've ever seen Archie Bunker, if you've ever seen All in the Family, that was a pretty common way people thought of minorities at the time. But my dad used to say all the time, there's two things I can't stand, prejudiced people and Enners. He used to say that all the time. And my mom referred to Asian people as, you know, bad things, etc. And we had a long ways to go in this country in the 60s, and we really in the 70s didn't get much there, and we're not totally there now. But, you know, we're making progress. But we almost, and they talk about reverse discrimination. Like, they have Soul Train, which is a all-black, all the people in the stands were black people. It was like American Bandstand for blacks. That's what blacks did when they couldn't get on American Bandstand, is they went to Soul Train. You know, and you have, you know, the National Association of Advancement of Colored People. You know, and some people say, well, where's the National Association of Advancement of White People? You know, I always say this, and this class is a perfect example, and this is the same type of maybe discrimination. How much money do we put in No Child Left Behind? And I always wondered how much money we were going to put in to No Child Left Ahead. You know what I'm saying? That there's just that balance that you have to plan on. This class is actually a real, it's an unusual course that you have a class with higher level kids and take a trip to Washington, D.C. That isn't done, and it's nobody's fault, but because of the politics behind it, you guys have to raise your own money for this trip. We don't just write a check to school to send you, because that would not be, you just can't do that. Okay? So there's lots of discriminations and reverse discriminations. But this whole thing started right here on how poorly blacks were treated in the 60s, and we'll kind of get into that more. Okay? Any questions at all? Hey, 3 weeks from today, what's due?